Thank you very much for joining. I'm going to talk about something which I'm super interested in myself as a gamer and as someone who spends a lot of time online, and that's the way we present visual identity and culture of belonging in games and other virtual spaces. My name is Peter Gasston. I'm the innovation lead at VCCP, and as I mentioned, I spend a lot of time online. If you've ever encountered me online, you might have seen me looking like one of these. These are my different avatars from across different social platforms, whether they be games or whether they be messaging or whether they be the traditional social channels. And obviously the way I present myself in these channels is very different. I'm a different person on LinkedIn than I am to the person I am on Twitter, and I'm a different person on Twitter than I am on the person that I present to friends in WhatsApp groups. The idea that I'm trying to get across, which I think is fairly much a truism, is that we all present different faces in different spaces. My personal favorite presentation is Bitmoji. Bitmoji, I feel, is the one that most accurately represents who I am, what I look like. You can see in my Bitmoji here the perils of being locked down at home for 8 weeks. The difference between my Bitmoji in January and my Bitmoji today is probably slightly more exaggerated, but not too much. But what's really interesting about Bitmoji is the fact that as a replacement for emoji, they let you be more expressive. You can create your own customized reaction GIFs with Bitmoji, but they also let you control a bit of how much you're sharing about yourself. You don't have to show photographs. You don't have to show the real you. It is a cartoonified, abstract avatar. And I think Bitmoji are doing two things that are really interesting and particularly relevant to what I'm going to talk about today. First of all is the beginning of this year, they introduced what's called mix and match. Mix and match is simply allowing a much broader range of clothing options for you. Before you had to choose individual outfits, now you could choose different jackets, shirts and shoes. Doesn't sound like much, but it's a way to completely customize and make it much more feel more like you, and also a way for them to monetize the service in the future by allowing brands in to sell sponsored items to you. The other thing that's interesting about Bitmoji is that they're moving into games. Bitmoji, your Bitmoji character, will be able to represent you in games on Snapchat, but also any games which use the Snapchat SDK. So your representation of yourself, your Bitmoji, will be the character that represents you in games too. Now, Facebook, never letting an opportunity to copy Snapchat go to waste, have also introduced their version of this. They're called avatars. They started rolling out in Europe last month, I believe, and in the US just this week. Very, very similar. They have a very good range of diversity, being a global company, but they're also doing the same thing. They're using them for reaction GIFs, but they're also using them as avatars which will represent you in their virtual space, which is Facebook Horizon, which is currently in a closed test and probably due to be released towards the end of this year. But as we see traditional social media moving into games and virtual spaces, we also see the opposite happening. We also see a lot of talk about games becoming the new social media. That's especially been accelerated by the coronavirus era. As people spend more time online, they're spending time online in games as much as anything else. And those games are places where they can meet their friends. We've had stories of people having wedding parties in Animal Crossing. We've had stories of people doing team meetings in Red Dead Redemption. Games are really micro-niche online communities. They're a group of people gathered together to share a common interest. Equally as valid, I would say, is something like Mumsnet, which is, for mothers and parents to come together and congregate around an interest. Now, games do exactly the same thing. And I think a prime example of this, and a quite sad example, was in the recent Final Fantasy online game, where 2 of the real life players of this community died of coronavirus. And so many of the players in game took to holding a funeral procession for them and showing their loss and their mourning by taking this procession through the game to celebrate the loss of their real world friends. But the thing is, this is not really new. Games have been social networks for quite some time. Online gaming has always been about groups of friends coming together for a common interest. I think why it's getting the attention now is because their scale is starting to approach the scale of some of the smaller traditionally defined social networks. If you look at the user number of Fortnite has about 350 million active registered users, and Twitter has something in that region of monthly active users as well. But it's also about bringing in people who are not typically considered gamers. Nowhere is that more obvious than in Fortnite. Fortnite, if you're not aware of it, and I'm not sure you probably must be aware of it, I'm sure it's been mentioned several times today, but it's a big multi-user online space. And it's really interesting because, yes, it's a game, but it's a little bit more. And I want to take a little diversion to talk about Fortnite for a few minutes. There are three really interesting things to know about Fortnite. One is that it's not just a game. Two is that it has no law, and I'll explain that in a second. And three is that it's completely free to play. Let's start with the fact that it's not just a game. Yes, it is a game. Of course, it is a game. It has this central conceit where people get together to play it, and it started its life as a game. But also, I think the best metaphor for it is that it's kind of like a skate park. It has this central function that people go there to perform, but it's also just a place for people to hang out and experiment in. People go to Fortnite to game, but they also go to Fortnite to chat with their friends, and increasingly they go there for other reasons too. I've no doubt that this has been mentioned several times already, or will be mentioned several times already by the end of the day, but the recent Travis Scott event in Fortnite kind of broke the rules of what games should do. Travis Scott, if you're not aware of this, Travis Scott launched a new single through Fortnite, and it kind of, anybody could go and watch this huge release event, but it stopped the general rules of the game. There were no weapons, there was no shooting. You couldn't play the game, you could only go there to observe what was happening. This is from a video of my experience of the end of the event, which was absolutely phenomenal. And that's been taken up a notch with the release of what's called Party Royale, which is a map in Fortnite, or a space in Fortnite, where it's purely for events and there are no game rules. You use your same character, your same avatar to go to this space, but you're there to enjoy a cultural event together. Tim Sweeney, who's the CEO of Epic Games, the maker of Fortnite, was asked, is Fortnite a game or a platform? And he said, well, it's a game, but ask me again in 12 months. Now, he was asked that question in December of last year, and I think 6 months later, we can already see what the answer would be next 6 months from now. The second thing that's interesting about Fortnite is that it has no law. And in games, law generally means an accumulation of knowledge, the backstory of, in fantasy games, you would have the kingdom and the kings and the royal families and the empires at war. Fortnite has none of this. Fortnite takes place outside of time and space. Other games, especially esports games like Apex Legends, have strong defined characters, and you play as that character. So although you can customize their weapons and their equipment, you are always playing as, for example, Bloodhound. Whereas Fortnite, you are always you. They give you the agency to create your own identity in that. And the way you express that identity is through what's called emotes and skins. Skins are essentially the visual appearance of your character, and emotes are customized signature moves, dance moves, or celebration moves that you can perform. And you can earn these through the game. You can also buy these in the game. And so you are always you, but you can express fully the way that you appear and you look to the other players. You've got complete control over that. Now, that's really interesting because it allows space for brands to come in. Things like Nike Air Jordans. Nike released Air Jordan skins into Fortnite, and that kind of feels okay because Fortnite takes place out of space and out of time. Whereas you wouldn't get the same effect if Nike released that into a Lord of the Rings game or a future game like Apex Legends. It's just harder for that to be a part of the game. And it also allows them to do a lot more crossover events. Just recently, they've done crossovers with John Wick, The Avengers, Stranger Things, Star Wars, Deadpool, all kinds of other entertainment and sports franchises can move into Fortnite. And again, because there is no in-game law, because there's no strong opinionated story about a place and time, these things just make complete sense in ways that it wouldn't in other games. The third thing that's really important to know is that Fortnite is free to play. You can pick up a copy of Fortnite on any platform, and it is fully cross-platform, and you could play the game for hours and hours, hundreds of hours against all of your friends. You can become a champion without ever spending a single pound. And yet it makes money. Last year in 2019, it made an estimated £1.4 billion in revenue in-game. And it did this by simply selling cosmetics to players. Understanding that players have agency, that they are themselves, they will want to customize that and show off their cultural identity and their visual identity. That's how Fortnite makes its money. As Matthew Ball observed, it turns out the most effective way to generate billions of dollars is to not require a player spend a single one. So really, the interesting thing about that, and the thing that I want to leave with you, is that Fortnite makes money by letting players buy items that express cultural identity. And it's one of the few spaces, the few big games where that really makes sense. But the breakout game of this year has no doubt been Animal Crossing. Animal Crossing on the Nintendo Switch launched right at the beginning of the lockdown. And all of a sudden, this world in kind of confusion and doubt, you had the option to escape into your island on Animal Crossing where everything is nice and ordered. And there are clear rules and you can create this beautiful, perfect environment around you. It's no surprise that it became a breakout smash hit. One of the really interesting decisions that Nintendo made in this game was to allow you to import custom designs. Clothing designs, housing designs, all kinds of things. You could download or find or unlock these images and bring them into the game. And that opened the door to a lot of self-expression. In Animal Crossing, you can express your sexual identity. In Animal Crossing, you can express your political identity. And in Animal Crossing, you can express that you belong to a fandom like the Detroit Lions. The Detroit Lions recently unveiled their entire fixtures for the year ahead using Animal Crossing. Now, this is a little bit of a cheat because they didn't do this in-game. They just used the visual language and cut together this video. But what they did do was make available a range of jerseys and clothing apparel branded with the Detroit Lions for players in Animal Crossing. And this has brought a whole range of self-expression. People spending hours making virtual clothes, streetwear, high fashion. People started copying, making digital bootlegs of clothing and bringing them into the game. And where people start to do this, of course, brands follow them into it. The first big account to really take notice of this was the Animal Crossing Fashion Archive, which started as a way to document all of the digital bootlegs that it was creating, like this Burberry that you see on the left, but then expanded to finding all the examples of high fashion in the game and promoting them. And this has encouraged brands to either partner with the Fashion Archive or come in on their own initiative. And we see brands like Marc Jacobs and Net-a-Porter and the streetwear brand 100 Thieves make available Animal Crossing clones of their physical fashion ranges for players to wear and express their brand affinity and cultural identity in the game. But it wasn't just clothing and apparel, it was also things for your home. The Getty Museum, I believe, were the first in this. They digitized a wide range of the famous paintings and portraits from their collection and made them available for people to put in on the walls of their virtual houses. And the Victoria and Albert Museum here in London, they created a range of William Morris wallpaper patterns that you could decorate your home with as well. That's led to things like this Animal Crossing interior design service, where they're charging people real money to decorate their virtual homes. Animal Crossing has created a cottage industry of retailers selling items and services that let players express cultural identity. For some idea of where this might go in the future, you want to be looking at things like Louis Vuitton's partnership with the big Asian esports phenomenon League of Legends. It kind of crossed all different types of touch points between the game and the brand. So Louis Vuitton's designers designed skins for in-game characters, but they also designed a trophy case to hold the esports championship trophy. And they also released a range of physical apparel that was inspired by the fashion of the game as well. So really crossing over from in-game to physical and the esports aspect of it as well. And brands like 100 Thieves, who I mentioned earlier, 100 Thieves is a streetwear apparel retailer that's come from the world of esports and gaming. It was founded by a professional esports gamer, and they still have professional esports players, but they also sell branded apparel, and they also do podcasts and videos as well as the live streaming. They've really understood this kind of new gaming culture, and they're, again, touching every single touch point of it. The 100 Thieves brand is there. And for a look at where this might go even further in the future, you can imagine something like the Royale digital hoodie. This is a hoodie that costs, I believe, £40 or 40 euros, and it doesn't physically exist. You buy this and you send them a photograph of yourself, and they will digitally apply this hoodie to your photograph and send it back to you for sharing into your social networks. So it's digital clothing. It's clothing you don't own. And I can imagine in the not too distant future, You could buy a single digital item which would apply to your Fortnite avatar or to your Animal Crossing avatar, and also be applied to your photos of yourself and shared on your traditional social media. So it's a way for this gaming expression to go both into the physical world and into the digital world, a kind of augmented reality of apparel. So summing up everything I've just been talking about, one of the things when we look back is likely to be how it helps destigmatize virtual existence. We spend so much time, we've been forced to spend, when we look back at the COVID-19 lockdown, one of the most significant things is likely to be how it's helped destigmatize virtual existence. We've been forced to spend so much time online and to stay in contact with people that we love and are friends with. We've chosen different virtual platforms, as well as video calling. There's been games, there's been chat, there's been everything else. And so this idea that virtual is one thing and physical is entirely separate from it, I think is likely to disappear. And as I mentioned earlier, games are online micro-niche communities, and they provide space for people to signal their cultural and social identities. And where there is space for people to signal those identities, there is space for brands and businesses to give them the tools and the services and the items to help them achieve that goal. That's where the big opportunity lies for the future. Thanks very much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I'll looking forward to answering some of your questions in the live Twitter Q&A on the hashtag Future of Gaming. Thank you very much.